Alright, we all good to go? Alright, well with the school safety holidays upon us, road safety is more important than ever. People are travelling around in a different form, going to different destinations, more traffic on the road. So it's important to remind people during the school holiday season that road safety is everybody's responsibility. We've had 215 fatalities on Queensland roads this year, which is a source of real concern. We're up 17 fatalities on last year, and that's before we start to consider hospitalisations and serious crashes, which often leave people with really permanent injuries and things they live with for the rest of their lives. So I'm standing up today with Chief Superintendent Stream, who will also talk about road safety from a police point of view, because of course police often are the people who turn up to terrible crashes and deal with the aftermath of tragedies. So what I say to people on school holidays is make sure you have a plan. If you're going out having fun, having a few drinks, make sure you get that Uber or a taxi home, or you've got a friend who's the dry driver. If you're travelling long distances, make sure that fatigue doesn't become the thing that makes that trip a terrible one. Have a rest every few hours. Fatigue is a real silent killer on our roads, and on our highway is not the place for you to succumb to a fatigue-related lapse of concentration at a critical time. So, look, I just appeal to people who are enjoying their holidays. It's great to see families out and about and having a good time, but road safety is really key to everybody, both while they're enjoying their holidays and also when they return to from their holidays, going home on that return journey. Chris.
Thank you. So following on from the Minister's discussion, police will be focusing on the fatal five, so that's speeding, driving without a seatbelt, drink and drug driving, as well as fatigue and distraction. So that will involve both covert and overt patrols along those routes which we know tourists and people on holidays tend to travel along. So you'll see those patrols out there along with fixed as well as mobile speed cameras conducting those patrols 24/7. Over the weekend, unfortunately, we saw the death of a young person, absolute tragedy, something that would have been prevented, and preliminary advice is that was driver behaviour that contributed to that death. So we've seen a number of tickets issued across the weekend as well for drink drivers, drink drivers have been detected across the weekend, and those tickets issued for a wide variety of offences across there. So our message is very, very simple. Your behaviour can contribute to injury traffic accidents as well as those non-injury traffic accidents. Those injury traffic accidents as well as the fatalities are obviously life-altering. So that type of behaviour, your behaviour, can make a change to the type of experiences you have on the road across the entire spring break, which is the operation which we're having today. Thank you.
Thanks.
So the advice from patrols over the weekend is we did see increased traffic across those major routes between, say, the north and south coast for the southeast area, but also other tourist spots throughout Queensland. So we are expecting increased traffic. Indications are that the hotels and the other tourist areas are heavily booked. So we've seen that across this weekend, and again we will see it, or we expect to see it in the return at the closure of the school holidays in that last weekend. So certainly yes.
Thanks, Chris. Fantastic. Any questions?
So obviously there's a lot of school holiday traffic going up and down the coast, specifically in the M1. We see a lot of roadworks at the moment, which reduce speed limits. But sometimes obviously there's not a lot of roadwork actually happening, whether they're on shift or whatever. Seem to have a little bit changing the speed limits back up to the regular 100 or 110, those 80 zones, but there's actually no roadwork happening to keep traffic moving at the school holidays.
Look, I think there's a misconception that you should only have a reduced speed zone when there's actual workers on site, when the reality is it's not just the workers on the site, it's the skinnier lanes, the narrower environment and the higher risk of collision that goes through those work sites that drives the actual reduced speed zone. So I do explain that to people on social media quite frequently, and I think people who hear that do understand that largely. But I am glad to know that I was on the M1 this morning, actually at two different work sites on the southern Gold Coast and at exit 41, We'll be bringing on at the exit 41 interchange upgrade the new northbound on-ramp in the next couple of weeks, which will then allow us to shorten that 80 zone through exit 41 considerably, because at the moment it's a much narrower area that isn't necessarily constrained to allow our workers to do that work. So what we will see in the future is some improvements to some of those reduced speed zones as some of that work is completed, and I think that's going to be great news for M1 motorists.
Is Cabinet, we've heard Cabinet put on till tomorrow for the Queen's funeral, is that correct?
Yeah, that's my understanding. I think today is a day of obviously a solemn day for people in terms of the Queen's funeral, and I think that's appropriate.
Do you know if Cabinet will consider the interim report from a commissioner as a
Look, I'm not at liberty to discuss Cabinet matters. I think you would know that as a Cabinet Minister. I'm not allowed to discuss that, but I know that the Sofronoff interim report of the review he's doing is due around about now and is being submitted. So, look, Walter Sofronoff is a top-notch investigator and legal mind. We have total confidence in his ability to do this review, and we look forward to that interim review being provided to us. I think it might be today or tomorrow. Yeah, look, we are working at that, and as a priority, this is an important issue. We want to make sure that the Torres Strait gets the same sort of support as other places in the state. You know, we have freight subsidies for, you know, places like Cunnamulla and St George and Barcaldine and places like that. Torres Strait obviously need to have the same sort of equal regard and respect, but we've got to get it right. So we're doing that, the yards on that at the moment. We're only up there about a fortnight ago, so it hasn't been a long amount of time that's passed by. But I can assure you that is a priority that I've taken away from that. The Premier has made sure that that's a priority, and we were already looking at that, and we'll take that away and come back with a much better proposal and policy that I think will support those Torres Strait communities a lot better than currently. Sorry, can you just speak up a little, Marlena? Look, health systems right across the country and in most developed countries are under real pressure because of the ongoing impacts of the pandemic. You know, like this is a fact and a reality that David Crisafulli never mentions in any of his press conferences. You know, I remember David Crisafulli's record on health. You know, he was part of the Razor gang that cut so many nurses, you know, nearly 2,000 nurses when he was in power. We remember his record. And in the middle of the pandemic, he was highly critical of the measures that were being put in place. You know, calling them, basically saying that it was like putting a doona over your head and sucking your thumb in the corner of the room. That's what he actually said. So when it comes to health, I don't trust David Crisafulli one iota. Now, I saw the gentleman today who was at his press conference, and my heart goes out to him. Anyone who has lost a loved one, it is a very hard and difficult thing to experience. But health systems are under pressure everywhere. That's why in the budget this year there was a $23.5 billion commitment to 3 new hospitals and 11 hospital extensions, on top of the 7 satellite hospitals that we committed to during the last state election, which are all now under construction. So we've invested heavily in the health system, not just through those measures, but since we were elected, restoring the deep and savage cuts that David Crisafulli and Campbell Newman unleashed on our health system. And thank God that we did. If we hadn't restored the health system in the 5 years leading up to the pandemic, things would have been a lot worse in this state and a lot worse for average Queenslanders, because we wouldn't have had the staff to deal with the situation. Yes, there are pressures, absolutely, but the same pressures are happening in Victoria, in New South Wales, South Australia, in Western Australia, and state governments are acting to deal with it. But for David Crisafulli to come to his press conferences and ignore the elephant in the room, and that is the ongoing issue of the pandemic and its impacts on health systems everywhere, he's only telling a very small part of the story.
He said that the opposition that came to the press conference today and accused the government of politicising
hard to take David Crisafulli seriously. I mean, for 5 months, press conference after press conference, regularly in Parliament, he talked about the laptop and the raid and the seizures and the goons, often used the term goons, and then was found to be lying. I mean, that's what the CCC independent report showed, that he lied about that, and he never apologised, never said sorry, never corrected the record. He will say anything to get into power. It's just like the person he called special. You know, Campbell Newman, he said was special in Campbell Newman's biography. He hasn't changed. So whatever he says in opposition to try and get elected, we know that when he does it, if he got elected, he'd do just what Campbell Newman did. He'd cut and he'd sack and he'd sell. That's what the LNP brand is. They'll say and they'll criticise regularly. He said he'd be different, but I notice every single press conference, it's always doomsdaying, it's always dire, it's always criticism, nothing positive to say. I'm saying that David Crisafulli is not someone you can trust when it comes to the health system or any policy area. He's shown that. If he had any integrity, he'd have fessed up and said, I got it wrong on the laptop, I'm really sorry, I apologise. And we would have, you know, people would have had some respect for the fact that while he made it up, that he also was found out. But we don't even get that from him. You know, we've seen the Premier, on occasion, has apologised for if there's a matter that's gone wrong, as sometimes happens, and she's been quite frank about it. I don't see the same thing from David Crisafulli. It's a relentless barrage of criticism, and you know, it's only telling a small part of the story when health systems all around Australia and all around the world are still under big pressure because of the ongoing impacts of pandemic and the transmission that's still occurring. Fortunately, we're seeing populations highly vaccinated, and so our ability of people to withstand an infection is as good as it can be. But he never mentions or factors in the pandemic. He always assumes that there's not a pandemic in the way that he criticises, and that's just simply not telling the full truth in any shape or form. Yeah, Cabinet is tomorrow this week due to the funeral of the Queen today.
Just on that, the government police in Queensland state justices advice to?
Oh, look, you'd probably have to ask a detailed question like that to the Housing Minister, but what we've been very clear on is that this is a tax that's targeted towards speculators in other states who orientate their property portfolio across, in a way that minimises the amount of tax they pay. I think it's a reasonable measure that will help pay for our commitments to increase housing, to improving the health system.
Are you worried about its impact on reducing investment and therefore reducing stock that we need in housing?
Yeah, look, I don't accept that analysis. I think there's some people who, at the moment are minimising their tax who would like to keep doing that, who are critical of it. That's understandable, but I don't accept that analysis.
Just on the indicated, this is a cancer hospital we know about. Is there infrastructure?
Look, I'm not in control of, obviously, of the hospital or the health system as the Minister for Transport and Main Roads, but I would make the point that we have a lot of things already named after Queen Elizabeth II, whether it's the law courts, hospitals, parks, stadiums. I think we've honoured her in a lot of different ways. I know the government's considering that further, but let's be very clear. There's been long-term respect and regard for her, and I'm sure that will continue. Thanks, everybody. Cheers. Good to